Okay, shall we start?
No, no, just going live.
Okay, tell me when I will start. My screen is visible to you,
Yes, sir.
so it is
So
live, right?
now, yeah, now you can start.
Okay. So, a very good afternoon to all of you. Now, in the second phase, today we will be discussing national and international regulations in chemical disaster management, and it will cover major statutes, conventions regarding the chemical safety or say chemical disaster or risk management. So, we will focus one by one. We will try to cover major conventions which is required for chemical disaster management. Parallelly, we will try to see what actually all these things are comprises of. So we'll start with one of the most and recent system, which is called as Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, that is GHS. The Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals is an internationally agreed upon system to standardize chemical hazard classification and communication. The GHS arose from an international mandate during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992 as a response to the ILO Chemical Conventions 1990 and the ILO Chemical Recommendations 1990. The adoption of these instruments necessitates a system for hazard classification and labeling. The GHS was developed over more than a decade and continues to evolve. The International Labour Organization, in close collaboration with its constituents, played a critical role, serving at the focal point for the technical work on hazard communication. So GHS is a major thing which already I have quoted in many classes, that with the help of this system of globally harmonizing, we can easily assess the nature properties of any chemical wherever we are. Means those countries who have agreed to follow GHS, they can sit. For example, if somebody is sitting in Israel and somebody is sitting in India, maybe the language is different, but with the help of GHS, we can easily classify the nature, properties, risk, antidotes, first aids, this type of things, or other complete MSDS can be easily understood and assessed with the help of globally harmonized system. The system helps us to gain or gather the knowledge regarding any chemical properties and natures and so on. What the GHS includes? It includes criteria for classifying substances and mixtures according to their physical and environmental hazards, because these are the parameters which will tell the chemical is hazardous or not and what will be the impact on the environment. Requirement for communication of the hazards through labels and safety data sheets is in GHS. It is described in a document known as Purple Book. There are certain number of books: Purple Book, Red Book, Yellow Book. But yes, for GHS, it is called as Purple Book, which describes all the classification of chemicals. The first edition of the Purple Book was published in 2003, and it is 2 decades past, and it is updated every 2 years. The latest revision and previous revisions of the Purple Book are available in the official UN languages on the UNECE website. So you can easily get this material from the website. But important point is that we should understand that this system is very much important and prominent to understand the nature of the chemicals and classification depending on the nature of the properties. So what are the objectives of the GHS? You can see in this figure. First is to enhance the protection of human health and the environment by providing an internationally comprehensible systems for hazard communications, because it is very much required that GHA should be there, and we have to focus upon the enhancement of protection of human health. If we are able to safeguard the human health and the environment, so we can easily understood the we can easily mitigate the impact of the chemicals. Second, reduce the need of testing and evaluation of chemicals, because GHS is there, and if one country has done the evaluation testing with the help of GHS, we can easily understand the properties and nature of the chemicals. Provide a recognized framework for those countries without an existing system. So, with the help of GHS, we don't require prior approvals and prior property recognition framework or understanding or testing on our face. We can easily understand with this system that okay, if GHS is approved over there, they will follow the international laws and protocols, and it is not again required to rework on the particular system and facilitate international trade in chemicals. I have already quoted that there are more than 6,50,000 chemicals present in the world, and it is growing day by day. So you can easily understand the nature of the chemical properties, or the MSDS will vary from chemical to chemical. So to facilitate or to use a chemical, it is not required to again go for the testing and with provisions of facilitating or understanding. To do the international business, for example, we want methane, we want chlorine, we want any type of chemical, we want sulfur. So the property of sulfur and chlorine, as per the GHS, will be same in any of the signatory country. So whenever a company wants to manufacture some chemical or to want to get some new chemicals, it could easily do by this particular system. That is the objective of GHS, and it is very well seen that the GHS has reached its objectives. GHS relate to the international labor organizations and international labor standards. It is again very much required that ILO has played a big and vital role, because when we talk about chemical safety or hazards of chemicals or chemical disasters, it basically what we say in majorly 90 to 25% contribution of chemical accidents is due to the well-established chemicals only, which have the MSDS and properties. And the first victim of the chemicals are generally workers working in the plants or the plant officials. So ILO, through its normative framework on chemicals, helps reinforce and create synergies with the GHS. If you talk about India also, we have a system. We are signatory of ILO. Then we have the bodies like Factory Advice Services and the Ministry of Labor and Employment. So with the help of Chief Inspector of Factories, wherein DISH provides the data, whatever is there. So Department of Industrial Safety and Health anywhere in India is the custodian of the chemicals. They know the properties, and everything is done through this network on the grassroots level. A number of international standards require the implementation of the elements of the GHS. Therefore, it is very much related to the ILO also. Some of the international labor standards must most closely related to the GHS are included in the box on the left of right of this page, wherein we have written that GHS together with ILO instruments are fundamental for chemical safety in the world of work. So you can see the right hand side, wherein C155 talks about Occupational Safety Health Convention 1981, C167. All these are international labor standards, which talks especially about the chemical terms related. OSH 81, again, it requires the workplace safety. 161 talks about the safety and health in construction convention. It is done in 1988. C170 talks about chemical conventions 1990. C174 is for major industrial accidents convention 1993, wherein it has been discussed that how to bifurcate major accident sectors through normal chemicals. Then C176 talks about safety and health in mines convention 1985. 184 talks about safety and health in agriculture convention, and 187 promotional framework for occupational safety and health convention 2006. So all these conventions are very much related to each other, and ILO with the help of GHS, or say GHS parallelly with the help of ILO, develops these standards, and these standards majorly focus upon the chemical part, and it is of much required and understanding that both are interrelated. Then if you can see the cycle, the contribution of GHS to occupational safety and health is much required. See, if we have learned something about fault analysis and event analysis, if we are able to mitigate fault, we can easily stop any big event with the help of any barriers. This is very much required, because if we know the precursors, if we know the system to stop, it is very much be helpful to all the system. There are certain steps for contribution of GHS. For example, we have three steps over here. Step one talks about hazard identification, wherein classification of chemicals based on their intrinsic properties. So intrinsic properties are those properties which is inherent to the chemicals. They show some chemicals are flammable, some chemicals say they are vibrant, some will be violent, some will be incompatible. So all these things are there, and it is being classified on the basis of these properties only: physical, chemical properties, or say somebody will got react, somebody will explode, some will produce toxic fumes. All things are there. The second thing is hazard communication through labels, SGS, and training. Again, it is very much required that any person whosoever is handling the chemical should know the properties of this thing. I will just give you example. For example, we are Indians. So when we go to a foreign countries, we can easily be understood with the help of our Aadhaar card, passport, or identity card. The same thing is for chemicals also. Each and every chemicals have their particular labels and SGS and training. So this peculiar property helps to communicate any person throughout the world that okay, this particular chemical will show this type of nature, and this belongs to this category. So in the step one, that is hazard classification and communication, is precisely at the core of the GHS for this reason, and is necessary component of the safe use of chemicals at the workplace. So in hazard identification, they generally assess the hazards prior to any accident, and during the inception phase only, or the production phase also only, they know the details of the chemicals. Step two is risk evaluation. In this step, assess how the chemical is used at the workplace. For example, we are going to mixing, we are going to stir, we are going to refine, whatever we are going to distill, whatever is the process. Distillation is there, refinery is there. So whatever things are there, then we evaluate the risk and assess how the chemicals is used at the workplace. Is it used in a raw form, or we have to add some mixtures, or we have to add some water, whatever is there, we have to dilute it, we have to concentrate it. All things comes into this particular phase. It takes into account about existing control measures already in place to reduce the risk. For example, if we know that chemical is inflammable and up to this particular point, it will produce flame, and we have some cut-off thing, or we can use any curtain type of thing, fire curtain or water curtain, whatever is there, then we can easily understand about the risk. So we have already evaluated the particular risk. And third step is, while hazards are intrinsic to a given chemical, risks are not, and so will vary depending on the levels of risk reduction applied. So it is very clear in the evaluation phase also. After hazard identification, we go for the risk evaluation. And the third step is safe use of chemicals. So GHS directly say about all these parameter, and it is very much related to the OSH. Step 3 is safe use of chemicals. If we are using safely chemicals, the chances of risk related to chemicals are very low. So if a risk reduction measures applied are sufficient, the level of risk is acceptable, and this can be considered as the safe use of chemicals. So if we are, for example, we know that after this particular parameter, it will burn, it will show volatile nature, it will produce toxic fumes. So if we are using the measures at the time we know the saturation limit or the cutoff, then we can easily say, okay, after this point we can stop, and the measures are quite sufficiently applied. If not, it is necessary to identify what further risk control measures are needed to reduce the risk to an acceptable and safe use of level. For example, it should be that acceptable level that it should not produce any harm to the community, to the stakeholders, to the human beings, and to the environment, including animals and plants. So all the things are there, and if we are using the chemicals safely, we can easily mitigate. So GHS have contributed in the three steps: hazard identification, risk evolution, and safe use of chemicals. So it is pertinent to understand GHS is very much important, and it is the convention which is very much used in today's spectrum. After this thing, it can be very easily done. Now, certain things, as we have talked about the hazards, there are hazards covered by GHS includes physical hazards, health hazards, and environmental hazards. You can easily see there are 17 classes of physical hazards. Again, if you see the purple book, you can easily understood which type of classification, because in this forum we cannot explain each and every hazard. But in the purple book, you can easily get about the classification. 10 classes are for health hazards, means what will the impact of chemicals on health? Is it a corrosive material, or it will be act as a nerve agent, or it will produce any blister? Everything is classified in as health hazards. And the last is two classes of environmental hazards. What is the impact of chemicals in environment? So if you talk about the classification, physical, health, and environmental has been very much kept. And you can easily see in 70 classes, we can easily understand explosive, flammable, aerosols, oxidizing gases, flammable liquids, solids, pyrophoric liquids, solids, organic peroxides, and desensitized explosive. That is 17 classes of physical hazards has been directly described as the physical hazards in GHS. Talking about health hazards, acute toxicity, skin corrosion, irritation, serious damage to eye, respiratory sensitization, carcinogenicity, reproductive toxicity, or aspiration hazards. For example, 10 classification is already mentioned. And last, the environmental hazards, which includes hazardous to the aquatic environment, acute as well as chronic, and hazardous to the ozone layer. Chlorofluorocarbon, you have already heard this type of chemicals. So these are classification. On a broader note, we can easily quote that GHS is covering all type of major hazards associated with due to the chemicals. Next, after the GHS, we will move on to International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code. Again, it is a very big and important code. The IMDG code 41-22-2023 for dangerous goods code relate to the safe carriage of dangerous goods by sea, but does not include all details of procedures for packings of dangerous goods or actions to take in the event of an emergency or accident involving personnel who handle goods at sea. So it is again a big thing why I am quoting over here, and everybody should know about this, that IMDG generally we can say bulk amount of chemicals is being transported through ship route only. So they handle, and because of environmental conditions also, it is much required that there should be a separate code or provision or regulation that could regulate the movement or transfer of chemicals from one place to another. So it is basically meant for safe carriage of dangerous goods, and we know there are nine classification of dangerous goods. You can easily Google it out that there are 9 classes of dangerous goods or hazardous material, right from chemicals, flammable chemicals to radioactive materials, and miscellaneous also, which includes biological agents also. There is a protocol. So the international maritime goods, dangerous goods codes have some principles. So principles are basically hazard classification. Again, as we have seen the GHS hazard identification, here they have shifted to hazard classification, wherein dangerous goods are grouped together based on the hazard present in the transport and proper packaging. Proper packaging. It is very much required that they have classified on the hazards already present. Proper packing. Dangerous goods are contained in packagings or tanks which are of appropriate strength and which will prevent the goods escaping, that is spill or leakage. So again, packaging is much important. Communication, as we have seen in GHS also, hazard communication. Again, it is a big thing and it has the same principle. Warning labels and identifying much shall be used to identify dangerous goods in transport. You have seen in ships also, if you have seen major ships, if you have visited some docks also, you can see different colored codes of ships. Somebody is red, some is say purple, some is yellow. So as per the coding or placard system, they are just coloring the ships, and this is again mentioned in the principles of IMDG. Documentation. Standard documentation is required to be provided when dangerous goods are being transported, because whenever you are crossing international borders, then the regulations come into picture. So we have to clearly document and tell that which type of documentation is this, because you cannot directly assess. Certain chemicals does not allow you to open and cross check with the help of testing materials, or you can take a sample and check what type of chemical is it. So you have to focus upon that. Then segregation. Principles are laid down for ensuring that those dangerous goods which will react dangerously together are kept apart for the safety reasons. As we have understood about the incompatible chemicals, that those chemicals are not compatible or we can react together, they are segregated so that these principles can be regulated. Stowage, again, principles are laid down for where to place dangerous goods on board ship to ensure safe transport and emergency response, which advices wherein advice is provided for the dangerous good involved in fire or spillage on the board ship, so that environmental conditions remain constant and it should not be degraded. But these are the major say classification principles, wherein hazard classification, proper packing, hazard communication, documentation, segregation, stowage, and emergency response has been included in IMDG code. Then there are certain layouts of IMDG code, because they have a number of things. So it is designed in an easy to use structure so that anybody who understood go and read can easily understand. It contains volume 1, volume 2, and a supplement. Each of the text contains specific part or portion of information. The central core of the text lies in the dangerous good lists DGL, which is in the part 3 under the volume 2. When you download this IMDG code, or if you we can share anytime, no issues. You can easily understand. Okay, this has been developed in different modules, but the each in module reflects the particular the directives which they want. So this is also there. In a later part of this document, the readers will be guided as a step-step approach on how to use the MDG code. So, talking about the volume 1, it contains some 7 parts, wherein part 1 talks about general provisions, definitions, and training. Part 2, classification. Part 4, packing and tank provisions. Part 5, consignment procedures. Part 6, construction and testing of packaging, intermediate bulk containers, large packing, portable tanks, multiple element gas containers, and road tank vehicles. So, for depending on the hazard or depending on the packing part, as we have already discussed upon the principles, we can easily understood that all the provisions are written over here. And part 7 talks about the requirements concerning transport operations. In volume 2, that is part 3 in the appendices are there, it contains the following. Part 3 contains dangerous good list, whatever the dangerous good list, so that any responder or any, say, enforcer can easily understand what type of chemical is there, and limited quantities exceptions. The DGL is the central core of the IMDG code and the present information on the transport requirement for all dangerous goods in a coded form. Then there are appendix also, appendix A and B. Appendix A talks about list of generic and NOS paper shipping names, and appendix B talks about glossy of terms. Then alphabetical index is there. The last part is volume 1 and volume 2 we have seen. The last part is the supplement. The supplement contains following text, that is emergency response procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods, medical first aid guide, reporting procedures, then IMO, ILO guidelines for packing cargo transport units, safe use of pesticides in the ships, and international code for the carriage of packaged irradiated nuclear fuel, plutonium, and high-level radioactive waste on board of ships. So, if you talk about the classification, as I've already quoted, there are 9 classes of hazardous material of dangerous goods. So, generally, I am this IMDG contains each and everything, and it shows a very clear thing and clear picture how to use these dangerous goods in a safe manner. Now again, there is also classification system for IMDG code. The purpose of IMDG code's dangerous goods classification system is to distinguish between goods which are considered to be dangerous for maritime transport and those which are not. So there should not be any ambiguity or issues related to the bifurcation. For example, if you are transporting an huge amount of bulk hazardous material, it could impact a lot. But again, there are certain chemicals which have the properties, and but they are not dangerous. It also identifies the dangers which are presented by the dangerous goods in maritime transport and correct measures to be properly taken to enable these goods to be transported safely without risk to persons or property, both within the port on the ship. Again, it is very tough or very issue to respond in a ship if certain accident, leakage, or say explosion took place in any ship carrying dangerous goods. It is very ship because the response to that is very tough. When we do a response on the ground or into ship, it is very tough to handle because the resources are very limited, mobilizing is very limited, wind condition, environment condition are very different when we talk about land. That's why it is very required that we should classify properly. Again, I have already quoted that dangerous goods are classified into one of the 9 classes which all have different properties. The way in which different classes of dangerous goods are handled in transport will again depend upon these properties and hazards presented and effects. So all these things are very much related about the IMDG code. Now, there is next is IATA, dangerous goods regulations. It again, it provides a big thing which is very much required, as we have quoted about different forms of GHS. Similarly, we have again a network called as International Air Transport Association, which gives dangerous good regulations, because we are talking about chemical part, but all these things covered. So it is majorly focused upon the air transportation. We have seen about the ship part. Again, we will go for this IATA. It is IATA DGR is to provide procedures for the shippers and the operators by which the articles and substances with hazardous properties can be safely transported by air on all air commercial transport. In 1953, the member airlines of IATA recognized the growing need to transport by air article and substances having hazardous properties, which, if uncontrolled, would adversely affect the safety of the passengers, crew, and or aircraft on which they are carried. So it is very tough because if there is some explosion of a transported chemicals, then it could not affect the crew and the handlers, but also the common public. Just think about a very dense place like Delhi NCR or say Mumbai or Chennai. If somebody is transporting hazardous or dangerous substance, then how will we stop the issues related to the chemical? So it is much required that there should be proper regulations. Most such articles or substances could be carried safely provided that they were properly packed and the quantities in each package were properly eliminated. What are the principles of IATA DGR? The IATA DGR is an easy to use manual based on the International Civil Aviation Organization, what's called the ICAO, technical instructions for the safe transport of dangerous goods by air. Again, as we have quoted and discussed about the hazards of a chemical ship transport, similarly for the air, the transport is also a very big thing. It incorporates additional operation requirements which provide harmonized systems for operators to accept and transport dangerous goods safely and efficiently. When during the transportation, during the transit, it is very tough to ascertain the properties of different chemicals at the same time of the dangerous goods. So, because of this manual or particular system, we can easily understand the nature of the chemical, and if there is some issues, and it requires response, we can easily respond through these principles. It also includes a detailed list of individual articles and substances specifying the United Nations classification of each article or substance and their acceptability as well as the conditions of the air transport. So all these things are the principles of IATA. Now, identification of dangerous goods by air, as we are already seeing the classification on 9 types, but here they have done something different. Basically, dangerous goods when shipped by aircraft can be mainly classified into 4 types. First type is forbidden under any substances. Second, forbidden under normal substances, but may be carried with specific approvals from the state concerned. So, in first case, first type, it is forbidden in any kind of substances, there is no change. But in the second part, they require certain specific approvals with the local states authorities, restricted to carriage on all cargo aircraft (CAO) and can be carried on passenger aircraft provided certain requirements are met. So when we are talking about the classification, we are classification in GHS also, in INDG also, on the properties of the dangerous goods as per the UN classification. Here the rules are certain different. For example, they are not allowing certain group of dangerous goods in any circumstances, but in few cases they are allowing as per the regulations and the local authorities instructions. Now again a very important convention, that is Stockholm Convention or on persistent organic pollutants, POPs. It is again a very big convention which talks broadly about the organic pollutants, or it is directly or indirectly to the chemical part. So, what is it? Stockholm Convention. It is a legally binding global treaty to protect human health and environment from POPs. Backgrounds regarding POPs: it basically comprises of organic carbon-based compounds, natural or anthropogenic origin. It resists degradation in environment, low water plus high fat solubility, and it bioaccumulate in fatty tissues. Semi-volatile plus occur in air, water, soil. That means in three parts it is present, and it has regional and global distribution and toxic to human and wildlife. So because of this particular organic pollutants, it is required that there should be a convention and international treaty so that the effects of these particular group, if you see the group, we have organic carbon-based compound, it exists everywhere, it bioaccumulate in fatty tissues, so toxics to human and wild. So it requires a special convention wherein all the signatory countries should be on one platform and can easily ascertain what should we do, what are the treaties, what we will focus upon. And it again, as I already put it, it's a legally binding global treaty. That means we have to focus on that particular part. Regarding timeline, it was adopted in Stockholm on 22 May 2001, entered into force on 17th May 2004, and as on 7th October 2005, there are 110 parties already signed a signatory of Stockholm Conventions. If you see the figure about certain are signatory and ratified: Armenia, China, Mongolia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Russian Federation, they all have signatory and ratified. Also the figure Stockholm Conventions for Central Asia countries. Some countries have not signed the Stockholm Conventions. It includes Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So there are certain things. Certain countries are saying that they will continue the using of POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and certain countries are not utilizing this particular conventions. There are again some provisions on of any conventions. So there are four main conventions. First is control provisions, which includes internationally intentionally produced POP, persistent organic pollutants, unintentionally produced POPs, and stockpiles and wastage. Similar type, as we talk about the chemical agents, or say CWC, we have already had a chemical weapon convention, wherein certain countries are signatory, and in front of UN officials, we have agreed as a country that we will not use in any form the chemical agents or chemical warfare agents. In similar thing, there are four main areas. First is control provisions, which talks about the intentionally and unintentionally produced POPs and stockpiling and waste of POPs. Second area is procedure in adding new POPs if required, and if it is required for the industrial use, what is the procedure? Again, it has been discussed conventions, general obligations, and financial and technical assistance. When we go for this particular data and when you see the conventions in a broader note, you will get a huge amount of data available for the convention. But on a major part, as in CBRN part, you will focus upon certain important issues only. Now, when we talk about the internationally produced POPs, the goal is elimination. So we have to eliminate this particular thing. Trade restricted to specific exemptions and acceptable uses of the ESGs. Pesticides have some specific exemptions. DDT restrictions, there is an action B, and DDT acceptable purpose in disease vector control reports to be to the COP every 3 years. And in case of PCBs, we have to focus upon cease production for new PCBs. So in this case, again, we have to focus upon certain parameters, and talking about the COPs, when it is basically called as conference of parties, wherein all the persons use a certain type of treaties where they discuss that how to focus upon all this particular part. Uh, Talking about PCBs, again, production, the cease of production of new PCBs immediately. PCBs again are oily liquid solids clear to yellow in color. It is a group of man-made chemicals, or we called it as a polychlorinated biphenyls. Polychlorinated biphenyls. Why? Because again, it is a group of this thing which are having very resistible mixtures and resistant to extreme temperature pressures. For example, if it is persistent and it is not going to be eliminated with the help of extreme pressure or temperature. So it is one must required that in intentionally produce POPs, we have to cease production of new PCBs immediately and eliminate if not in use. So it is very much required. Reports to the conference of parties every 5 years should be submitted as decided in the convention. So everything is on a similar line. There are certain exemptions for these. Specific exemptions several countries has requested. Party may start by informing secretariat. Duration is for 5 years unless party specifies an earlier date. Extension again will be given for 5 years if party requests and COP approves, and may be withdrawn by a party anytime. So if certain countries require that they require POPs, certain amount of POPs for their manufacturing or production part, and or they want to produce certain new type of chemicals, then it could be ratified with the help of COP request or COP accreditations. Certain obligations of Stockholm. First is develop, implement, and update an implementation plan. Designate a national focal point. Similarly, when we are discussing about the OPCW, then in India we have NSCWC as a focal point for working and support organization for prohibition of chemical warfare. Similarly, we have obligation in this convention also. Promote and facilitate a wide range of public information, awareness, and education measures. Encourage, undertake research, development, monitoring, and operation on all aspects of persistent organic pollutants and their alternatives. Report to COP on measures taken by the party and their effectiveness, and data estimate of total quantities of POPs in Annex A and B are traded, and the list of states involved. So Annex A and B, again, it is being listed that what type of quantities is approved by the COP, Conference of Parties, wherein they can easily say depending on the quantities and the particular nature of the persistent organic pollutant. So it is mean this thing, and each and every country who is signed this particular convention is being obligated to follow this particular commitments. There is one Article 7 which requires about the implementation plan, and parties shall also, they have already quoted something about the parties for POPs. They should develop and endeavor to implement an implementation plan to control and eliminate all POPs. Again, it is persistent, and I have already quoted about the properties that in extreme temperature and pressure also it is not being eliminated. Party should also shall submit plan to COP within 2 years of entry into force of conventions party. If any country who has entered the convention, then they have to submit a report, review and update a plan on periodic basis in a manner to be specified by the COP. Cooperate with other parties directly or through intergovernmental organizations and consult stakeholders in all these actions, and endeavor to utilize integrate these plans in national sustainable development studies, because the particularly organic pollutants are very, very tough, and it exists everywhere, so there it requires a separate strategy, and the party should have certain implementation plan to mitigate this type of hazards. Now you will ask who national implementation plan, who is involved. So an implementing agency must be used to guide process. Then there is UNEP, World Bank, UNDP, United Nations Industry Development Organization. So all these UN bodies are there who can be considered as national implementation plans, and these all agencies are involved for this particular conventions. Next, another one important convention is Basel Conventions. It is on control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste. It is also very important convention, particularly for the chemical hazards, chemical safety, or chemical disaster. It talks about hazardous waste and their disposal, implementation and enforcement, taking stocks, laws, institutions, administrative actions, enforcement, and enhancing compliance. So this particular Basel Conventions have all the parameters about the hazardous waste and disposals. See, if chemical is being used and they are being drained off through clean water, or it is being disposed on an open land or incinerated, any case, then again it is a big problem to the environmental. So Basel Convention come into picture, and it talks about majorly about enhancing compliance for hazardous waste disposable. When we talk about hazardous waste, it is in very much classified, but for the study purpose, we can focus upon certain restricted thing. So, international response to hazardous waste. You can easily understand in this particular era, we are using a number of chemicals per day. And for the production part also, or for the industries also, we have a number of chemicals. So, how to after 10 years or 20 years, when the lifespan of any chemical or any product is being finished, then how to mitigate, how to focus upon all these things come into picture. So this is much required. It In response, we have bilateral and multilateral agreements. Basically, we should talk about bilateral and multilateral agreements. In 1972, prevention of marine pollution from the dumping of waste and other matter has been there. London dumping it was called, and in 1899, Basel Convention, 1991 Bamako Conventions, 92 Agenda 21, and similarly, n number of agreements there. Then compensation, liability, marine pollution prevention, regional seas. Everything is there, but in this, Basel was the most important, which talks about the hazardous waste and response to hazardous waste. Basel Convention, it was adopted in 1989, but it came into force in 1992. Convention has parties. It is the most comprehensive global environmental agreement on hazardous and other waste adopted for the purpose of protecting human health and the environment against the adverse effects resulting from the generation, management, and transboundary movement and disposal of hazardous and other waste. See, this is a very big disaster in near future. It will be characterized as the biggest man-made disaster, and it will be focused upon the pollution part, or say for example, certain countries will dump their waste to any other country's boundary. It will again create a big problem. I will just give you an example. Right now, in many segments, we are using this stubble, or say what we say parali in Hindi, stubble, that is being used to generate energy. But again, when it is being dumped in an open ground, it generally produces certain toxic chemicals or say gases like methane. So if somebody is dumping their the stubble or parari to any native place, what will happen? So all the things are very much important. After say 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 10 years, what is the impact of all these particular hazardous material or chemicals which have been disposed anywhere? So we think that it is a disposed material, but the hazards associated with that material is very much required. So we are focusing upon this transboundary movement, and Basel Convention directly talks about this particular hazardous waste and its properties. The main goal of the convention was to protect, by strict control, human health and the environment against the adverse effects which may result from the generation and management of hazardous waste and other waste. So it is very clearly mentioning about the goal. They are not deviating from their assigned target. It is directly talking about the strict control on the regulation part and any adverse effects for generation, management of hazardous waste and other waste. Development of after the adoption of the convention, after we see 1992 we have adopted. In 1995 ban amendment is there, which talks about the reversal in COP10. Illegal trafficking was there, financial mechanism, and secretariat for regional capacity building centers is focus on COP9 and COP10. There are a number of COPs, but COP9 and 10 especially talks about the development after the adoption of the convention. If you want to learn in details, you can easily Google out COP 1, 2, 3, 9, 10. You will get the detailing of how these things are going on. Again, when COP10 was also adopted, a new strategic framework for the convention from 2012-21 was developed. Technical guidelines were adopted on co-processing of hazardous waste in cement kilns, environmental sound management of mercury waste, and environmentally sound management of used tires. So when you can focus upon all these new parameters which comes to existence in past 2 or 3 decades, and number of tires is produced, and number of carbon material has been released. So all these things are there. Parties again took over 20 additional substantive decisions on other matters. The parties also adopted the Cartagena Declaration on prevention and minimization of hazardous waste. So all these things is being included in Basel, and conference of parties are regularly discussing upon the international framework to stop the impact of hazardous waste by its means. Next again is Rotterdam Convention. The objective is to promote shared responsibilities and cooperative efforts among parties in the international trade of certain hazardous chemicals in order to protect human health and the environment from potential harm and the use to their environmental sound use. So it is much required that Rotterdam Convention focus upon again certain hazardous chemicals. Earlier we are focusing upon in Basel also, in Stockholm also, hazardous good business material. But here Rotterdam is basically focus upon the chemicals or certain hazardous chemicals, not all chemicals, in order to protect human health and the environment. When you see about this particular Rotterdam, its scope is very clearly defining that chemicals banned or severely restricted by parties to protect human health or the environment, severely hazardous pesticide formulation, that is called SHPF, causing problems under conditions of use in developing countries or countries with economics in transition. So this Rotterdam Convention is very much related to our country, wherein it is talking about these because we are one of the biggest use of pesticides. So it has restricted certain things. Then there are certain provisions also. Key provisions are PIC procedure. This procedure provides a framework, national decision making process on report of hazardous chemicals in and ensure compliance with these decisions by exporting parties. So again, there is information exchange, which talks about facilitation of exchange of information on a broad range of potential hazardous chemicals. So there are two procedures. First procedure is decision making procedures, and second is the information exchange about the potential hazardous chemicals, so that it could easily be mitigated with the help of the properties associated with. And this convention majorly focus upon the chemical parts. What are the benefits of this convention? Prevents unwanted trade. This chemical focus upon unwanted trade about the chemicals. PIC procedures legally bind the importing and exporting parties shared responsibility, levels of playing field, and secretariat facilities dialogue between trading partners. This convention also includes early warning system, PIC circular, global info and notification of regulatory actions and incidents. SHPF is also there as an early warning. Then informed decision making by importing party about dangerous good decisions, provide basis of decision making process on future imports further into PIC circulars. Other parties strengthens capacities of parties to assess risks associated with the chemicals. Export notification, wherein exporting parties have to inform importing parties. Opportunity to seek further info from exporting parties. Exporting parties avoid sending unwanted chemicals to party. With the help of this convention, we have say about the notification. Okay, this is much hazardous. This is not hazardous. All this information is there. And information academic export, again, it is related to GHS, wherein improving labeling and provision of safety data sheets assist importing countries to understand and manage potential risks with the help of obligations of under GHS. So all these things are benefits which is not covered in earlier Basel or Stockholm. Rotterdam is there, which talks about the unwanted trade, early warning system, informed decision, export notification, and information accompanying export. These are the benefits in this, which particularly talks about some hazardous list of chemicals which is being used in a trading field. Networks of DNAs and technical systems as two things. Wherein in networking system, other countries have some similar conditions to use the chemicals, and for technical assistance to develop the infrastructure and capacity required to implement the convention parties with more advanced systems to regulate chemical provide technical assistance to other parties. So these are certain things which are the benefits of these conventions. Now, for the annex part in Rotterdam Convention, currently have 40 chemicals listed, 29 pesticides are there, and 11 industrial chemicals. So, we can easily bifurcate that pesticides and industrial chemicals are being used. Example would be DDT, chlordane, linden, parathion, monoprotophos, ethylene oxides, daldrin, four of which are HSPF. Example, liquid formations of methamidophos and phosphomidone. Industrial chemicals will be PCBs, tetramethyl lead, polybrominated biphenyls, and star, whichever is the wherever when we see this document, which is quoted by star, it is not a ban. Now, in this thing, they also focus upon industrial chemical management in Rotterdam Convention, because it is very much required. You have listed the chemicals, how to manage this chemical industrial chemicals. Because if you are not able to manage, then again it will be big problem. Lack of information on chemicals production, import, use, exposure, and effects on human health and environment. Coordination of data collection and storage necessary. Problems with national coordination, priority setting, need to involve industry, shared responsibility, need to implement the GHS, and lack of integrated life cycle chemicals legislation. So all these things are required for a framework. Information is there, coordination of data collection. These are the issues which we face. How to share responsibility, how to implement the GHS, how to integrate life cycle chemical legislation. So Rotterdam helps the stakeholders to prioritize and ascertain that okay, these guidelines can be used to properly utilize the chemicals. This is basically the lifestyle of chemicals, writing from, if you can see this figure, life cycle: import, storage, export, transportation, use, again recycling and disposable. This is the cycle. Start from the use and recycling, production, imports. This cycle will help us the particular thing. But one more thing is disposal, and complete cycle has a number of issues, starting from the production to the storage to export to transportation to use to disposable. So all these things, the life cycle of industrial chemical, and in any phase of this cycle, hazards persist and issues are there. Now, in case of, as per Rotterdam Convention, industrial chemical management, what is required? First thing is primary responsibility of industry, polluter pays, and address full cycle of the chemicals. So we have to address full cycle of the chemicals. It is not Rotterdam Convention talks about the complete cycle. It does not stop that okay you are focusing on the production part or say export part hazard. It says complete cycle. You are producing the chemicals, using, transporting, and then disposing of. But you have to focus upon all the things. So they have fixed the responsibility of the industries. Again, responsibility of the other actors. Complete value chain means whosoever is utilizing, using, transporting, they have the responsibility. It requires prevention and precaution while utilizing this chemical. Cooperation and coordination on national and international energies means synergies. It talks about synergies, how to synergize about the chemical part, use of resources and information and capabilities effectively. For example, if we are using a chemical for which we don't have any new knowledge or it's a new organic solvent, and say some countries like Russia have the knowledge. So in this case, we can easily manage the knowledge which Russian people have in comparison to the Indians, and an efficient and enforceable framework. Rotterdam again focus upon this efficient and enforcement framework. So they have fixed the responsibility and they have got this full cycle of the chemicals. Who are the actors? It is talking about on a wholesome approach that nothing should be left and each and every part of the cycle is being focused and seen so that the wherever the issues come can be easily mitigated. Then they also talk about some framework wherein in scope they are talking about distilled chemicals, new or existing chemicals, exemptions, low hazardous and low risk. Depending on the exemptions, also the scope tax, what framework they have made Rotterdam Convention, talk about the scope. Then talk about the data collection. They talk about the data on hazards, effects, exposures, database for storage of disseminations, info of accidents and accidents. Assessments, hazards from GHS, risk assessment from RCSC, Montreal Protocol, all the convention, Rotterdam Convention, Stockholm Conventions, Montreal Protocol, everything is there. So they have quoted over here that we can assess any hazards from GHS and assessment from any earlier conventions. They also, in the framework, they also talk about risk benefit analysis, where integration of socio-economic factors should be there. It is not like that we are a poor country and we are importing and exporting hazardous chemicals which can impact on the economy. Risk management decision, it talks about the bans, restrictions, criteria, priorities, whichever is required for the for the upliftment of the country's economy. Forms a basis for integration sound management for industrial chemicals and streamlining a mainly sectorial approach in managing industrial chemicals. So all these things have been covered in the framework provided by this particular convention. It also improves, convention also talks about improves coordination and synergies between national actors responsible for the sound management of chemicals and increases efficiency of sound management. In this particular slide, we can easily say it's between normal actors. For example, if we talk about a chemical, there are a number of parties, right from the manufacturer to the state authorities, to the national authorities, to the enforcing agencies, to the decision making. Everybody is there, and it is much required that every should be coordinated and synergized. It is not that we cannot use the chemicals even if it is hazardous, because we also want some new thing. For example, we want organophosphate and you use it as an as in pesticides or say fungicides. So how can we stop? So for this particular, the convention talks about how to coordinate and synergize between top to bottom approach. So every stakeholder should be there and every role player should play a good role. It also facilitates implementing international efforts to improve chemicals, like they have used SISM and GHS, and internationally legally binding instruments like the Stockholm, Rotterdam, and Basel Convention. So all these things are there. It enables nationalist evaluations and assessments, potential leading to the ban or strict chemicals, thus contributing to listing chemicals in Annexure 3 of the Rotterdam Convention. So Annexure 3 have all the details to how to stop, as we have seen the list about the 40 odd chemicals. Certain are industrial chemicals, certain are not. So these all things are covered in this particular conventions. Now, talking about the implementation part, there should be national strategy, resources, political will, and sector buy-in. So everything should be there. It is not like that. If one pillar is not supporting us, we can stop the chemical disaster and we can safely this thing. There are certain priorities also. The priorities are GHS implementation for all sectors. It is not like that. Some sectors are implementing GHS and some are not. So this is very much required. Again, Rotterdam Convention talks about risk assessment for bans and restrictions. If it is banned, why it is there? What is the potential risk? What will be the effect to community? And all these things are there. Criteria and procedures to identify high concern chemicals. Again, it talks about the Stockholm Conventions. Environmental and workplace monitoring, management of major hazardous installations, national information systems, and poison centers. So priorities are very clearly listed that all the things should be there, and when we focus upon the international conventions, all these criteria should be taken into picture. It is not like that we are focusing upon one part and other part is being missing. So all these things are there. This is the PIC procedure for a convention. For example, decision guidance document and distribution to all DNAs. Then countries there, which will takes an import decision, interim or final, on the basis of the information provided in the dangerous goods description. Then secretariat should be formulated in the country, which reviews that the relevant information concerning decision has been provided, replies to the country and informs world of proposal. And it will have by chemical import response of countries, and failureless countries did not have submitted response. This convention talk about the decision making document or decision guidance document, which talks about how they will focus upon, how they will go for the litigation part, and how we will collaborate internationally. So all these things are very much required so that we can easily understand the nature and uh, vulnerability of the risk associated with the chemicals. Then some more guidelines, which is very much required in international procedures, which I will not be covering on a major because time is too constrained. One is chemical weapon conventions because we are on severe part. Convention, it talks about prohibiting the development, production, acquisition, stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons and their precursors. As I already quoted, OPCW is the international body organization for prohibition of chemical warfare agents. And in India, National NACWC, National Association for Chemical Warfare chemicals. Comes under Cabinet Secretariat, which in India assists OPCW for the prohibition of chemical weapons in any phase. They don't allow. Then we have one more directive. It is called a CIVOSO directive, European, specifically applied to European Union member states. This directive establishes measures to prevent and control major accidents involving dangerous substances. So dangerous substances particularly have chemicals and radioactive materials plus biological agents also there. CIVOSO directive also talks about, but majorly European Union member states are there. Then we have International Labour Organization's Chemical Convention C-190 and recommendations R-200, wherein they have already quoted which type of chemicals is being used at workplace. It talks especially about the chemicals that should be utilized at the workplace and how to handle the situation in case of any exigencies. Then we have one more international guideline which is of concern, which is basically a European-based United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, ADR, RID, and ADN. ADR is European Agreement concerning the international carriage of dangerous goods. RID regulations concerning the international carriage of dangerous goods by rail, and ADN European Agreement concerning the international carriage of dangerous goods by inland water regulate the transport of dangerous goods within the Europe. So when we understood or where we read all these type of guidelines or conventions or rules, we can easily understood which type of chemicals are regulated. In India also we have a number of guidelines and conventions, but again as we can see Rotterdam, Stockholm, Basel are there, GHS is there. Parallelly we have CWC, CIVOSO and ILO conventions plus UNEC. We have all some more UNEPs there, United Nations, some certain more protocols, but we will majorly focus upon these particular conventions, which is of use and we can easily understand. All everything is very easily available on the internet also. Now, for the Indian context, there are certain rules and regulations which directly or indirectly governs about the chemical disaster. First is CAEPPR, that is Chemical Accidents Emergency Planning, Preparedness and Response Rules, 1996. These rules framed under the Environment Protection Act 1986 and provides a framework for emergency planning, preparedness and response to chemical accidents. Basically, this particular rule is framed after Bhopal gas disaster in 1984, wherein we don't have any proper mechanism regarding emergency planning and preparedness for chemical accidents. So this rule comes into frame that if there is a chemical accident, incident, leakage, or blast or explosion, how to mitigate this particular thing, and it majorly focus upon this part. Then plus CAPPR 1996, we have one more important rule, that is MSIC rules, MSISC rules. It is manufacturing, storage, and import of hazardous chemicals 1989 regulates the handling, storage, and transportation of hazardous chemicals to ensure their safe management. Both these acts come under Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change, when they are the custodian and rule making body. So in this particular MSIC tools, there are scheduled three schedules, but two or three list around the number of chemicals which is being treated as hazardous chemicals, and with the help of MSIC rules only, we can ascertain that this particular group of units comes under major accident hazards or not. Because this is particularly for MAH units where we have seen about the on-site plan, off-site plan, and DM plan, all these things. with the help of this MSIC rules 1910 in India, we are able to ascertain which type of chemicals is being listed and how it will be impact. One more important act is Public Liability Insurance Act 1991. Again, it mandates the requirement for industries dealing with the hazardous substance to take out insurance policies to cover liability arising from potential accidents. See, the community residing nearby your plant or any plant which is using hazardous chemicals, the community is not aware what are the properties of these chemicals, and if they are impacted, again, they are not knowing or unknowingly they will fall in this chemical trap. So again, it is again liability of that particular company or industry to make certain insurance provisions so that if in any case this type of incident took place, then they can have probably we can say we can compensate something, but yes, on a monetary ground we can compensate with the help of Public Liability Insurance Act. They have to ensure that everything is being covered. Then we have NDMA, National Disaster Authority, which have you can say National 2005 Disaster DM Act 2005, which covers about the legal framework for disaster management in India. It includes chemical disasters and establishes NDMA at the national level. Talking about the guidelines, they have two particular guidelines. They have two particular guidelines. One guideline is focusing upon chemical terrorism, and other is focusing upon the chemical terrorism part. So these are two things which is much required. Then we have NTMP 2009. It is now 2019 National Disaster Management Policy. It outlines the policy framework for disaster management plan in India, including preparedness and response to chemical disasters. NDMP covers all the particular segment, and they have made some thematic and sub-thematic areas of consideration wherein each ministries have given certain roles. Talking about the chemical part, we have Ministry of Environment Forest as a nodal ministry, and other ministries in supportive role as Ministry of Labor and Employment, Ministry of Chemical, etc. are in the supportive role. Then a new code, and earlier it was Factories Act, but right now we are on a verge to change this factory as at OSH and WC code, that is called Occupational Safety Health and Work Conditions Code 2020. The code amalgamates several labor laws in India, includes those related to occupational safety and health. It aims to ensure the safety and well-being of the workers, including those working with hazardous chemicals. So in this code also, we can focus directly that yes, chemicals are being used, and codes say where to use, where not. Then we have some Indian standards codes, IS, various IS codes such as IS 14489. It talks about guidelines for hazard analysis critical control point. HACCP IS 15622 talks about guidelines for evaluation of fire and explosion hazard of chemicals, and other provide specific guidelines related to chemical safety. When you just Google it out, you will see IS 14489 and IS 15622, which talks elaborately by this particular standards. Then we have one more environmental impact assessment, EIA notification 1994. It talks about it requires industries handling hazardous chemicals to undergo an environmental impact assessment considering the potential impacts of their activities on the environment. Fact is that 1948, it is major act which encompasses all the factories which have more than 10 workers for non-power, and for power 20, encompasses provisions related to health and safety of and welfare of workers employed in factories, including those dealing with hazardous substances. So this act again is a big thing which have been used in India, and then there have certain state level regulations. Like many states of India have their own rules and regulations related to chemical safety. What we call as state factory rules in a central domain is basically called as model factory rules, but in state we have state factory rules. The example is that the Maharashtra factory control of industrial major accidents, that is called SEMA rules 2003, is specific to the state of Maharashtra. It is only a guiding rule. We cannot say that it is being used as an act, but it is only being used as an guiding document so that we can easily associate it. So on a closing note, I will say that there are n number of provisions and guidelines. List I think will be shared shortly by HPNI, and I will personally assist that I will provide you the links of all the codes which can easily understood. But on a broader note, these are the certain particular codes wherein which is much required for chemical disaster. For NDMA part also, I can also quote that there are two guidelines for chemical disaster. One is for chemical industrial disaster, that is majorly focused upon the internal. And there is one chemical terrorism disaster, which talks about the terrorism part, focus upon the chemical agents, warfare agents, and the chemical that can be used on the dual purposes. So with this, I think I've covered most of the regulations, important regulations, and it could be easy for you to again just rule out the important parameters with the help of this presentation, which all is very much required for you. So with this, thank you very much. Any questions you can ask me? So I think there is no question right now in the DM, no text. So with this, I think this session is completed, and you can write me anytime regarding any description about any convention, so that I can give you elaborately. They are very big conventions, so it is very tough to bring all these conventions on one small PPT of 7 hour or so. So it is much required to learn something more with the conventions and rules and regulations regarding the chemical disasters. So with this, I thank you all for listening to me. We'll meet in the next lecture. Thank you very much.